Good evening, everyone. I'll call to order the Marin Water Board meeting of August 6th, 2024. Terry, if we could have roll call, please.
Yes, good evening. Director Larry Russell.
Here.
Director Monty Schmidt. Director Jed Smith.
Here.
Vice President Matt Sampson.
Here.
And President Ranjiv Kush.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to check on any board member questions regarding today's agenda. And also, Terry, if we have any public comments on the agenda.
No questions.
There are no public comments on the
Okay.
agenda.
Then with that, if we could have a motion to adopt today's agenda.
So move. Second.
Terry, roll call vote, please.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
Vice President Sampson.
Yes.
And President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
We'll move on then to directors and general managers announcements. With this item, we'll include any external meetings and then follow up in the next agenda item with board committee reports. So Matt, do you want to start?
Yep, thank you. Just one tonight, President Kush, and that's on the 25th of August, excuse me, 25th of July, I attended the Tomales Bay Foundation committee meeting or external group meeting. And majority of the meeting was actually focused on water quality maintenance and water quality monitoring of Tomales Bay, as well as some rehabilitation work going along on the shorelines there. So we didn't get to talk about potential projects that Marin Water is doing, but hope to focus some efforts on their next meeting. And that's it for me today.
Thanks, Matt. Larry?
Only one thing, I attended the WAC meeting on Monday.
Great. Jed?
Great. Yeah. On the 20th of July, I attended the Marin Conservation League lunch, which was fantastic. What a great group of people, dedicated, and I think really appreciating the partnerships that we have here, particularly you, Sean, with your group in being stewards for our land. And then we had our Marin Sonoma WAC meeting on yesterday morning, which was a robust meeting that that went through their current financials, their work with government grant efforts, which we did discuss building closer ties with Marin and Sonoma and working together. I think their feedback to us was that they don't really work with us on those efforts, and they would like to. So maybe a shout out to reach out to the Sonoma folks and see how we can partner together and have more of a regional approach to how we look at it. They went over the dam negotiations with PG&E, which are complex and ongoing, but the $2 million grant that Jared Huffman was able to get for them for decommissioning that dam and the complexities that go around restoring that river and partnering with the local tribes and the impact on local communities is ongoing. It's hopeful. And then there was an overall tenor, I think, of working with Marin in a closer way. I am curious, Larry, your thoughts about it, but it seems like over decades there has been a lack of trust between Marin and Sonoma in the last few weeks and in the last 2 years, almost 2 years being on this board. We've now had enough opportunity to be able to meet with and get to know the mayors of Santa Rosa, Natalie Rogers, who's fantastic, Mike Healy from Petaluma, with the mayor of Cotati. I'm about 3/4 of the way through. And frankly, they just feel like they haven't had these conversations before where we can see how we can work together and collaborate. And I'd love to just encourage all of us to open ourselves up to see how we can have a regional approach. And that starts with just listening, right? It's not coming in and taking anything. It's just listen. And the more we do it, the better. And then we'll build trust, because it does feel like trust has been lacking over decades. And I'm going to do my best to rebuild that. In that regard, we did have a meeting with Supervisor Rabbit from Sonoma, with Supervisor Rodoni from Marin, with Tony, who's the GM at North Bay Watershed Association. Ben, Paul Cellier was there, and a few others, to see how we can just further conversations around our contract negotiations, both with the short-term contract that Marin has with Sonoma that's coming up in the next year. And the sense I get is that there has not been a lot of conversations and a lot of progress on that, as well as looking at a broader way we can work together. So I highly encourage us to get the timeline in. I think we're hoping to have monthly meetings, but like make it happen and let's have the conversations. Let's listen. Let's think about every decision that we make and how it will impact everybody, not just benefit us, but let's open ourselves up. So a really good, thoughtful set of meetings and just trying to help us move forward.
Monty, I see you just joined. We were doing director's announcements. Anything from your end?
Nothing from my end tonight.
Got it. Okay, nothing from me either. So Ben, any director, GM announcements? Okay, thanks everyone. We'll move.
I'm sorry. I think we missed the public comment, general public comment. So maybe we want to loop back and catch that before we move on.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No
Public comments on items that are not on the agenda.
Yes, we have a couple. First one is Phil Sauter and then 1402. Go ahead, Mr. Sauter.
Thank you. First, like most of us concerned with a 2-year water supply, I follow the daily numbers, and I noticed this morning that reservoir levels, while still above average, are 3 points lower than they were last year at this time. We've all seen the welcome trends in use reductions in the last 3 years and wondered if we'll see a rebound, despite rate increases that should discourage excessive potable water use for outdoor irrigation. Along with the recent water efficiency master plan and its renewed commitment to reducing heavy outdoor water use, it seems like we would benefit from early signals that outdoor conservation is on track or not. This information would allow us to take actions to flatten the summer curve and extend our water supply with conservation. I've previously asked to see a current version of the water usage map, which was last updated in 2019. I believe our data system should be able to produce a map like this every 2 months based on our bi-monthly water bill information. And I'll again request that this information be made available to the board and to the public so that real-time data can help inform multi-million-dollar decisions on conservation programs and future rate adjustments. Second, a few weeks ago, one of my fellow broom pullers who grew up in Mill Valley made the observation that well-watered green lawns are the preferred landscapes for many of the government and civic buildings in Marin County. Those of us who visit these buildings may get the impression that non-functional turf is a desirable landscaping option, when in fact there are better alternatives available. Some of these green lawns are maintained with non-potable water, but I don't recall any signage that indicates how much potable water is being saved by using recycled water. And I wonder if there may be an opportunity for educating these agencies so they can help educate the public. And third, I wanted to call attention to various community gardens in Marin County. For starters, there's the conservation garden here at the district offices that let visitors see attractive low water using plants to consider for their own home gardens. There's also the Marin Art and Garden Center in Ross. And in Woodacre, we have a community garden that's dedicated to native and water saving plants. We started the garden 25 years ago with continuing advice from Roger Buchholz and Dan Carney of Marin Water. The garden contains mature trees along with dozens of native plants labeled with common and scientific names. There is no installed irrigation system, and watering is done by volunteers with gallon water jugs and occasional visits by watering trucks from Spawn and others with access to well water. I've spoken with 2 of the original founders of this garden, and they're willing to work with staff if there's an interest in showcasing this garden on the district website and in mailers. And I've just spoken with Carrie, and she does have that interest and is going to include Adrian, and we'll try to get a conversation going on that garden.
Next speaker is 1402, then Marilyn Price. Go ahead, speaker.
James Holmes, Larkspur. Once again, the Phoenix project was not on your agenda. Public comment comes before the manager's report, so I don't know if the manager will report on it, but he should tell us the current status. The last time he mentioned it at the last meeting, he made a vague reference to issues to be resolved. What issues? When will they be resolved? Earlier, you said that you wanted to see this back on the agenda and approved in July, and the purpose of the delay was simply to provide further explanations to interested stakeholders. Why the continuing delay? Please be wary. I predict that if opponents are able to delay or downsize this project, it will be just the first step. Next will come arguments that since Phoenix is so little used and the dam is so old, it should be removed and the creek restored as it is being done up north, and we should get grants for that purpose. Don't let that happen. Get Phoenix moving. Get it off the ground, on the agenda, approved, and underway. That is your duty to procure water resiliency for your customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Next is Miss Marilyn Price.
Yeah, and thank you for letting me speak. I'll be very brief. You know, I got my water bill and noticed the increase. And I'm always biking around. And I noticed, like the other day, a neighbor was watering these plants have been in the ground forever, at least as long as I've been there, and he was watering them. I do truly feel, I wanted to say something, but I bit my tongue, that it is lack of knowledge of how much water our plants need. I don't know how to get the word out. As I said, I was too shy to say something to the person, but I really think that is a big problem. People don't know during the summer how much water their plants need. I don't know how many people are getting the water sensor meters that you hand out. Of course, they're not long enough probably for these established plants, but that's a conundrum, you know, how we solve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. There are no further speakers.
Great. Thank you for all the public input. Jed, I think you had one addition.
Yeah, sorry, a couple of small points. I'll be quick. A couple of things to report on the Sonoma meeting. One is that the bond rating did go down a little bit recently from AAA to AA plus. That's about where we are right now. It shouldn't have a material impact, but you know, the financials are difficult with variable costs and versus, you know, their ability to predict flow. However, their FERO increases in their ability to storage has had a material impact on their storage. So that's been helpful for Mendocino and Sonoma. In regards to the dam decommissioning, I actually think there's going to be a net benefit in many ways for some of those communities. So there are ways that they can leverage that actually may be a positive. And Natalie Rogers was elected as the new chair, and she's the mayor of Santa Rosa. Last thing I wanted to say is that which I forgot to report, I did connect with the members of the SEIU union that has some concerns about our ability to implement SDI as part of our negotiated agreement a year ago. And I just want to encourage the staff, which I think you're already aware of it, that this is important to them. Communication is probably the most important. I understand our systems are behind. It's another further poke to me that we need to get our SAP system going as quickly as possible so that we can help support our staff as best we can. So let's do that as best we can. But even more importantly, let's communicate, you know, be in touch, talk with folks, bring them in. I think it'll help build trust.
A little correction. It was their credit rating that dropped, not their bond rating.
I'm sorry, the credit rating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that, Jed. We'll move on then to our consent calendar, which today only includes one item, which is approval of the minutes from our last board meeting on July 16th. Sorry. Terry, do we have any public comments on the consent calendar?
There are none.
Okay, then I'll ask if we have a motion to approve our consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson,
Yes.
and President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, then with that, we can move to our regular agendas, beginning with item 9A, new development on turf limits. Welcome, Carrie and Paul.
Yeah, good evening. Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director. As Carrie is bringing up the presentation, so fast this evening. We'll get into it right away and get to questions and discussions, which I'm hopeful will be robust on this item tonight. Thanks.
Good evening, Board. Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. So tonight's discussion is an informational item, and it's really focused on looking at new development and how much turf is being installed. And we want to just kind of take a step back and remind ourselves and members of the public that there have been prior discussions around the need to revise the Graywater Ordinance. We know it's not effective, and we know it's not fully addressing the intended purpose, which is really to limit outdoor water use. And as part of that process of evaluating the Graywater Ordinance, trying to find something that would align with that original intent got us to this point where we're looking at turf limits. And so we're here to just have a conversation about some ideas that we've developed to kind of circle back to this idea of updating the Graywater Ordinance. So we'll start with an overview. We have some sample policies that others have implemented. We'll look at a proposed approach and some existing regulations that we have already adopted in the state as well. We'll look at some specific data to new development that's happened within the service area. Overall impact on water use if we kind of went down this path of this new approach, and then wrap up with recommendations and next steps. So starting with some example policies. So we want to just keep going back to this is really focusing on single family new development, okay? So at the July 16th board meeting, there was kind of a brief overview just to kind of gauge interest. And it sounded like there was some interest in kind of taking a deeper dive and really evaluating what the potential here is. And so what we've done is looked at incorporating a new development requirement for single family homes to limit turf installations. And in reviewing these policies, we have kind of a range here, starting with the box on the left, which is to outright prohibition of all installation of turf. And this is something Southern Nevada Water Authority has implemented. So those are folks in Las Vegas area. And this applies to all customers, not just single family. So everyone across the board. The next step down, kind of moving from most stringent to least stringent, would be establishing specific limitations on specific amounts. So we have an example here that North Marin Water District implemented. They actually started this back in 2002 with 800 square feet. And then in 2016, they reduced it down to 600. And they continue to evaluate, what is the potential here for kind of continuing to ratchet that down. So they're currently at 600. The next step would be limiting turf as a percent of the overall landscape area. And we have two examples here, which is Santa Barbara and Santa Monica, who've both landed at 20% for their limitation. The other end of the bookend is the state's water efficient landscape ordinance. So the state will only allow 25% of a landscape to be installed with turf grass. And this applies to all new landscapes, right? So regardless of it's single family, multifamily, et cetera, all new landscapes. And so for our proposed approaches, we kind of stuck a wedge here in the middle of these, kind of smack dab in the middle, as we're taking a kind of a combination approach, if you would, in again, evaluating our single family residential new developments. We're proposing that we limit turf areas to 10% of the total landscape area, not to exceed 1,000 square feet. And this would be effective January 1, 2025. And so this is kind of our starting point for this analysis. There have been a few other organizations that we found throughout the US that have done this combination approach, none though in California. And it really seems to be tied to having a range of landscape sizes, right? If you have a very kind of cookie cutter neighborhood, every lot size is fairly similar, like we see in Novato, it makes sense to have a specific amount. Otherwise, doing this combination approach seemed to make sense. So that's where we started. Before we kind of go into the details here, I just want to touch on the existing regulation. So we do have a district policy that states that any new and existing non-residential landscapes are subject to the non-functional turf irrigation prohibition, which means no new commercial landscapes, anything that's non-residential cannot be installed as turf grass unless they can justify it as providing recreational benefit. So that's one piece. The other piece is the state regulation. I mentioned it in the last slide, but I think it's important to note that it also applies to rehabilitated landscapes. So anytime a building permit, plan review, or plan check is required, then those folks need to submit the landscape plans to us, and they'd be considered a rehabilitated landscape, and they're also forced to comply with or required to comply with this 25% limit. So now jumping into kind of our data. So we looked at new development landscape plans that were submitted to the district for review. Again, just new construction. We have a sample of 16 sites. We feel this is an appropriate sample size considering that the average for new construction sites in the district for 22 and 23 were 15 per year. can see the range that we looked at was very small site at just about 500 square feet and then just over 20,000, which is pretty consistent with what we see within the district. Every once in a while, we get a really large landscape, 150,000 or so, but it's somewhat rare. Only one in the last 4 years, actually. So, and then our overall landscape area is about 7,000 square feet. So what we did is we took each of those 16 landscape plans and we extracted what type of plant material they were installing. We looked at high water use turf, and you can see the number of sites there. So 4 sites installed high water use turf. You can see the range that they installed, the average square footage, and then also the range as a percent, right? Because those are our 2 metrics we're looking at, is total lot size, percent of lot size, and 1,000 square feet limitations. We were really impressed. We said only 4 sites had installed high water use turf, right? But then we took a step back and said, well, what else are they installing? Because, is that really telling the whole story? And we found that numerous sites are installing really large areas of moderates, what we call moderates, and turf alternatives. So a moderate and a turf alternative would be like a no-mow native meadow, right? Or something like a 90-10 blend, which is a marketed blend of grass. It's 90% tall fescue, 10% Kentucky bluegrass. So more on the moderate side. So on average, that moderate's about 42%, right? So it's really large areas being installed. And then finally, we looked at artificial turf, and the majority of sites were installing actually artificial turf at 6 of the 16. Some of them fairly small, but also some of them quite large. You can see the average there is 19% for these sites overall. And then 3 didn't install any turf, right? So we took this information and then we said, okay, well, how are they installing these artificial turf sites, these turf alternative sites, and these high water use sites? Meaning, what types of irrigation are they actually utilizing? And we know that the type of irrigation that is installed really determines how a landscape will be maintained. So if you have a meadow and you have pop-up sprinklers and you have your meadow, there's no way to irrigate the center of that meadow unless it's mowed and maintained as a lawn, right? So it dries out faster and ultimately requires additional water use than just a moderate meadow would normally. So that's overhead spray, right? It's going to be implied that it's mowed and it's higher water use. If it's drip, then it could be maintained as a meadow or a lower water use plant material. There's lower water use, there's less runoff, and there's less overspray. And so we looked at these 16 sites. Every single one of them installed overhead spray, regardless of the plant material. So that really told us that while they're installing artificial turf, they may need to have these sprinklers for cleaning. It's really convenience around cleaning and cooling, right? So they could just spray it down with a hose, but they've installed sprinklers. So when that artificial turf has reached its useful life of 10 years or less, the site's really set up to roll out turf grass, right? Sod, if you would. Same for our moderate sites as well, right? The moderate turf alternative. So the fact that the overhead spray is installed and kind of prepped, it really makes a conversion to a high water use plant material easy, and it kind of helps inform what ultimately the water use would be required for these types of landscapes.
How did you get to the opinion that it wouldn't just replace it with a new artificial turf?
Cost. Artificial turf is incredibly expensive. Consider when you're measuring, rolling out sod, it would be at least one major determining factor, just off the cuff. And I could be wrong. I'm wrong. I mean, we're assumptions here, but the fact that the sprinklers are installed tells us that overhead spray is installed tells us a lot about the potential for higher water use in that area.
Is there any evidence? I mean, this is a great question, and I know that you're trying to ferret out where things might go into the future. Artificial turf has been around for, I think, it feels like long enough. Have we seen what does happen when artificial turf hits its end of life? Do people tend to replace it, or do they with more artificial turf, or do they tend to go to turf?
We don't know because they don't need to submit plans to us to make that change. Right? So it's a bit of an unknown. So then we took this irrigation equipment acknowledgement and said, okay, well, if we took these sample sites and we implemented this approach to limit square footage by percent and 1,000 square feet for all of these sites, what would be the impacts be on water use, right? So we're assuming then if these limits were placed on single family new construction that are irrigated with overhead spray, what's the potential savings? And you can see on the table, we took the total amount of turf grass that was installed with all the sample sites and said, well, if these limits were applied, how much would they, how much would have been allowed? And what are the associated water use, which is the sample sites water use column, and then the turf limits water use column. And for high water use turf, it's not it's 20%, but it's only 1 acre foot because we saw very small high water use lawns being installed. But when we look at the moderate and the artificial turf, we really see an increase in savings potential. And with the total savings being about a 68% reduction in use. So we also looked at what was driving these savings, right? To help us understand, is it the percent or is it the limit on square foot? 3 of the sites estimated. Yep.
I'm sorry, before you go, I'm sort of stuck on the fact that artificial turf has significantly double the amount of water use over high water use turf. Could you explain why that number is that way?
Yeah, it's because
are they?
So the
I see. It's because there's more acreage in artificial turf and they're using irrigation to cool it or clean it or whatever.
Yep.
And so it ends up being a higher per acre foot use. Okay, thank you. That helps.
Yeah, and then I'll just call out the savings assumptions that are listed there on the bottom. For artificial turf, we assumed that it would be irrigated between a low and moderate, right? We know they're not trying to make it grow, so it's not a high water use, but there's some water use associated with it, certainly. And then for moderate and turf alternatives, we assumed a kind of an average between high and moderate water use as an estimate. So you can see what was driving the water savings. Only 3 of the sites were limited by the 1,000 square feet. So these were our really large sites that were limited there. 6 of the sites were limited by the 10% requirement. And interesting enough, 7 of the sites weren't impacted at all. So 3 of those sites didn't install any turf. So there was nothing, no change there. And 4 of the sites either installed very small areas or, that already met our requirements. So that was kind of telling. It's almost half of them would not have been impacted.
Are you sure, though, that's the motivation? That it wasn't that they saw the handwriting on the wall and said, don't put turf in?
I'm not sure what led them to make that decision. Yeah.
Well, we could ask them.
We could.
And it seems to me it would be wise to visit the sites that we did the plan review on, that got the artificial turf, to even talk to them and say, what do you think you're going to do here? I'm thinking about my neighbors that have artificial turf. I haven't seen any come out. Now, I don't know if it's 10 years old, but I have to think it is. And I would happy to ask them, but I would guess they're going to put in what they took out. Okay. I don't think they have plans to start putting in something that needs to be irrigated. Now, with that said, understand I am 100% behind this. Okay. I think that grass in our climate is a mistake. How we get there is the problem, or the potential problem. I'm concerned that you said we're in the middle. I don't necessarily see 10% in the middle if others are at 20%. The only 2 examples you listed were both at 20% and the state's at 25. Now, I don't have a magic crystal ball here either. I don't know what the right number is. I think Ed Jamison's comments were, I don't know if you saw those or not, but I thought they were valid. There's some point where it becomes de minimis, that it's like, there's no sense in building it because it's too small. I don't know, when you got 150,000 square feet, that's kind of a different cat. And I don't know what approach they would take politically, but I have to imagine that they are well enough funded that they could think about a way around this, to approach directors and things like that. I'm not aware of anybody doing that, but there's many ways to skin a cat.
Yeah,
So,
I think those are good points, Karen. I know right now this is being presented for consideration, right? We're not at a decision-making stage yet.
Informational item.
So we can keep going then.
So in light of our findings, we do have a recommendation, right? So we want to just kind of reiterate, this was stemmed out of a need to improve the effectiveness of our gray water ordinance. And it was, that is applied to our new development, folks who are going through our new development standards. So the recommendation would be to repeal and replace the gray water ordinance with a policy that limits turf installations. The limitations would be 10% of the total landscape area not to exceed 1,000 square feet for newly constructed single-family homes with a potential effective date, January 1, 2025. And that this new policy would require moderate lawn alternatives and artificial turf to also be subject to the limitations if overhead spray is used. So if a true meadow is installed using subsurface drip, then they wouldn't be held to these requirements, right? It would be able to be irrigated as needed. So, truly a low or moderate. And finally, just to kind of wrap up the gray water ordinance piece, recognizing that substantial remodels is currently included in the gray water ordinance requirement. And so any substantial remodel that's pulling a permit would be required to comply with the state's limit of 25% for any part of their landscape that's altered as part of the project. And so that kind of, captures those folks in another kind of systematic way. And then just wrapping up with next steps before our discussion. So we're here to discuss and get policy input on the potential of limiting turf in these new single-family developments, and then rescinding the gray water ordinance. If there's interest, we would schedule an adoption and do a public hearing notice to make these changes. And also just calling out, we also have our fixture standards update. We have not forgotten. So we're kind of thinking we take these in tandem. If there's interest, if not, we'll just bring back fixture updates, when the timing is right. And finally, we just want to recognize that we would want to coordinate with our local towns and cities, right? They'll play a key role in letting customers know of this change. And we would want to provide any resources and training needs to support them and us in meeting these regulations. With that, happy to take any additional comments or questions.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. Jed, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I know this is a lot of work, and thank you for coming back to us with your presentation. A quick question. So does the state 25% requirement for new construction, do they have any size limitation like the 1,500 additional? So it could be 25% of a 10,000 or 30,000 square foot lot. So, and I agree with Larry that, non-functional turf grasses don't have a place here. I also think there could be an overreach for us to insert ourselves into people's lives, and they can manage, a lot themselves. I would be okay going a little bit better than the state. Our situation's probably a little bit worse than in other places. So 20% seems a little bit more rational to me than 10. I think the big move is that 1,000 square feet. I think that's actually an enormous impact. But although even though your sample set didn't show that, so I might push that up a bit. And maybe that's 1,500. I'm not sure what the right number is. But I'll just add an anecdote that in the last year, I'm becoming a landscape expert. It is astonishing how many people come to me with their bills and how I immediately go to what's in your yard. And then I'm walking around these yards and I'm seeing what they have and I'm seeing where the waste is and where the water is. It's probably the number one thing that I deal with with our public. It's really important. And it's astonishing to me how many people still need to be educated about it and the importance of it. So I think you're going in the right direction. I think your recommendation is going a little bit too far.
Larry, anything else?
Yeah. I agree with Jed. I think that it's okay to attempt to be the leader, but we need a rationalization for it. And I didn't feel that tonight. And the other thing is that, you say this is for thought, but it's August and you're talking about January 1st. So the thought process is 4 months long or something like that. It's not very long. And, I think it's a good thing. I just think we need to be careful about the numbers. I think being that the state number is in place anyway, maybe we would slide forward with that number first, maybe a little better, and then look at what happens. But I think we should be doing these, at least some level of survey effort for these folks to find out what their thinking is. Why did they put sprinklers in? I mean, just ask them. They don't want to tell us, that's fine. But I think, you can presume what the thinking is, but it's really easier, I think, just to ask them and find out why you're going that direction. Maybe it's an investment, that were someone to wish to buy their house and not have to do too much, they could potentially take out the artificial turf and use the sprinklers that are in place. I don't know what the logic there is, but I find it interesting. Sprinklers pretty expensive, relatively speaking. And it's interesting that they're going to that effort, but I think it's better if we ask than assume.
Sorry, Dan, a quick clarification. You said new construction, but that's not, it could be an existing house and they completely rip out their lawn and do whatever they want. We're not touching that.
Correct. It only applies to new construction. If it's a rehabilitated landscape, they would not be held to this requirement. They would be required to comply with the state's 25%.
Any reason?
No, that's
Hard to
what we
monitor.
decided to start with new developments.
Great. Thanks, Jed. Larry, Monty, any comments?
Yeah, Carrie, I'm just curious. I'm looking at the presentation on slide and on slide 6, and I'm seeing, percent of the range of developed land exceeding 25%. And I'm just trying to understand, are these people from moderate turf moderate or turf alternative? Is that outside the state guidelines, or do the state guidelines only address high water use turf? I guess part of what I'm trying to get at is are people, is there a compliance issue here?
Right. Sorry, I couldn't get my mic on.
Sorry.
So the state requirement, the state just says 25% maximum. It's actually high water use plant material, but that's generally turf grass in our area. And
Okay.
so, sorry, tell me your question.
So I'm just looking at the percent range here, which, if you look at the moderate turf alternative, that's not turf, so it's not held to that 25% standard. Is that correct?
Correct.
Could there
yes, but it's
also be
moderate.
a timing issue there, Carrie? I don't know when the state regulations came into effect.
2016. No, so
Okay.
it's because it's it's considered a moderate and the state only limits
Okay.
high to 25%. Yeah.
Thank you. That was just a point of clarification. Okay. I mean, in general, first of all, again, thank you. This is really important work. I think this is heading in the right direction, and it is stuff that we need to do to really bring us forward and make us prepared for the future that we are going to deal with. And so I think something in this direction is the right thing to do. I'm mindful that, I think what's really meaningful in some respects is the cap of 1,000 square feet, because that's 100 by 100. For people do simple math, it's 10 by 100. So figure, whether that's a long strip or you want to make it a square or whatever it is, that's the size we're talking about. And when I think of somebody who has a very large land, piece of property, that might still be very utilitarian if they want to have an area for kids to play or so on and so forth. When I think about smaller units where people have a very small landscaped area, they may 10% may not leave them enough area to actually do something that has utility. And I think that's a comment that's been brought up by others. So I wonder if there's a good balance, of both the cap and the percentage. And I agree, maybe I'm really not a fan of turf. I think that, but I also have turf. I'll be totally honest. If you come to my house, I have turf, and I moderately water it, and I'm very careful about it, but it is a giant consumer of water compared to the rest of my usage, to be totally honest. So I think shrinking it is a good thing. I'm going to be shrinking it in the near future, but I'm mindful that we want to be balanced. And so maybe that percentage might make more sense with 15% with still that cap being what keeps us from having inordinately large lawns that just really aren't in keeping with the climate that we're in. So maybe some thought about when we come back to this is, for smaller developments that are going in, how would that 10% really even functionally exist? Like how much of the footprint of a new, property could they actually even put into turf? And does that cross that threshold of like, is it even worth it? We don't want to necessarily tell people, we don't want to unintentionally basically make it so unworthwhile that people stop doing it, because then essentially we're saying don't do it at all. I think we want to be moderate. So I'm thinking about the smaller units and the smaller properties, and maybe some thought about the percentage with respect to those.
Thank you, Monty. Matt, anything to add?
Just a few things. Carrie, once again, to echo the other board members' comments, thank you very much for continuing to bring this back and continue to refine it and give us a really well-informed look at it. Although I'm not completely sure I understand the artificial turf water use, but I'll have to schedule a time with you offline to figure that one out. To get back to your last asked for recommendation, I definitely support the gray water ordinance ban, and then I feel very comfortable bringing both that and the fixtures to the same meeting if that makes it easier for you. So thank you for that. Looking at the numbers, I think, as we switch and the recommendation of 10% of total lawn or 1,000 square feet, I have a hard time moving forward with that when we're more restrictive than something like a Santa Barbara, which I think has a lot less rainfall on average than us, and they're restricted to one reservoir and some various other alternative water supplies. But to try to go more strict than that right off the bat, I think is going to be a little bit more of a shock to the system as we do this. But I do think that that number, somewhere around 20%, is the right way to go, because although these numbers are really relatively very small in the use, I mean, 15 new homes a year out of our complete service area, it's not really a big bite, but I think we do need to stop the bleed moving forward and have an inflection point where we start addressing the biggest consumption of our water, and that is the artificial turf, I think, here in Marin County. So I definitely like to support something much more comfortable with the 20%.
Thank you, Matt. I think pretty consistent responses, Carrie, but I have one just question for other board members. This is all conditioned, at least on the moderate turf requirements, on overhead spray. So those limitations would not apply if another form of irrigation was applied. So that actually is less constraining, if you think about that, than what it looks like at first glance. I'm wondering if that changes any perspectives, on the pretty tight limits that have been proposed. If we say those don't come into play when other forms of irrigation are adopted.
I think that's an interesting question. Do you have a feel for what the difference in cost is between, normal spray versus subsurface?
I don't.
I'm guessing it's at least double, if not more. Because, you've got to do, I mean, I'm even curious about maintenance. You can't see these things. So you find out they're not working by brown spot. Sure. And then how do you repair it? Especially if the critters like to chew it. It's kind of an interesting question. It doesn't offhand move me, because I don't know how practical it really is, but it's an interesting question.
I'm not feeling a lot of willingness to reconsider. I suggest we move forward with a rethink on based on the feedback that we've had.
Would perhaps Director Kush, we could go to public comments and maybe loop back around, because I do have some thoughts of what I've heard with the proposal, and see if the board coalesces around it.
Good. All right. Let's open it up for public input.
Yes, we have two commenters. We have Mr. Phil Sauter and then Ed Jamison.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I know staff trust policies and ordinance to influence customer behavior, and I'm glad to see a policy that reduces the use of potable water for outdoor irrigation. I noticed in the write-up statement that when available, use of recycled water is a district requirement, so it was removed from the options. But given the low availability of recycled water throughout the district, it seems it would very rarely be available under current conditions. So I wonder if there's an opportunity to make it more available as part of this new policy. Specifically, in addition to the stick of limiting the amount of turf in new landscape installations, could we also provide a carrot by giving homeowners the option of connecting to a purple pipe system and using recycled water to irrigate a larger amount of turf without using any potable water outdoors? With our current limited coverage of purple pipe systems, it may be impossible for a new home to connect to an existing purple pipe system. In other cases, it may be possible to connect, but it may be expensive. And it's these expensive but not impossible cases that I'm focused on. If a homeowner wants to spend $500,000 installing an extension from a new house to an existing purple pipe system, why not provide that option? We know that some residential customers aren't bothered by bi-monthly bills in the several thousands of dollars. Couldn't there be some residential customers who won't be bothered by a $500,000 hookup fee to a source of unlimited recycled water? And wouldn't we like the revenue? This could also be an important future model for existing homeowners who are heavy users of potable water for landscaping. As we become less able to support this wasteful use of potable water, and as prices become higher for those who continue to do so, the option to connect to an expanding recycled water system starts to look better and better. This will be especially true as the purple pipe system continues to expand and the distances for new connections become shorter. One problem with telling homeowners that they need to limit their use of potable water outdoors is that existing revenues will be reduced. However, if the district were able to move toward a hybrid system and replace that lost potable water revenue with revenue from selling recycled water, the revenue problem could disappear. It seems logical to me that over time, the district would be able to grow its recycled water business while reducing its potable water usage. That would have the dual benefits of extending our potable water supply beyond 2 years while still maintaining revenues.
Thank you. Mr. Ed Jamison, then Marilyn Price.
Yes, there seems to be agreement that the gray water ordinance should be repealed. This issue has no relationship to any turf restriction like what has been discussed tonight. It's well past time for the board to direct that the gray water ordinance be rescinded. Tonight would be a good time for the board to declare this to be done. The board can later sort out all the details of what new restrictions on new homes turf may be appropriate. A 10% turf restriction is way outside the realm of reasonableness. The state's 25% number is a reasonable maximum, but I believe we need a cap on square footage of maximum. We need a reasonable proposal for turf restrictions, like the state's 25% limit with a 1,500 square foot maximum. That would allow small lots to have modest amounts of grass for children without allowing massive expanses of grass on larger lots. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Marilyn Price and then James Holmes.
Yeah, well, and just a couple things. And I don't know, this first one may be kind of out of your bailiwick, but in terms of artificial turf, there are so many reasons why not to install it apart from water because of environmental concerns of having to you know, what is used to make it, and that it has to be landfilled at end of life. And there are groups like our Plastic Free Marin group, which used to be part of the Sierra Club, is actually looking into artificial turf right now, and they're very much opposed to it. So again, it's kind of like apart from the water use. But the other thing, and again, I apologize because I don't know that much about it, but I noticed during the drought, people who had lawns did not water them. They turned brown. And when our water came back, their grass looks fine. You know, maybe it's got more weeds, but they mow it and it's fine. So how much water for those that are using grass still, how much water do they really need do they need to water it during the summer or will it come back again? I don't know. I haven't looked into that, but just something I'd like to bring up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Holmes, please.
Yes, I have seen several cases locally where old houses have been removed and the old yards, which maybe reflected 70s era drought measures, have ended up with a lot more turf. So this discussion is relevant. However, I think a strict percentage limit may be a bit too restrictive in cases where the lots are very small, as they are in some parts of Larkspur. I'm not sure whether a cap would address that, but if it doesn't, I think that there should be at least a minimum size that is allowed, irrespective of the percentage, so that people will not end up being restricted to such a small postage stamp that they won't be able to use it. Thanks.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Thanks, Terry. A lot of interesting input there. Ben, you had some thoughts on moving forward?
Yeah, my goal would be to see if we can get a consensus of the board, which then would allow us next time to bring it with the ordinance and kind of wrap this up. From what I heard, and I think consistent with the board's comments, this is an initial step. We can ratchet further down in years to come if the board at that time would want to. So specifically, I would put out there 20% maximum area, which is slightly, obviously, tighter than the state, that I think reflects generally our ethos of just being a bit better than the state. 1,200 square feet. Keep in mind that's twice Novato, just for reference, but I do understand and appreciate, as how lots get smaller, 10, anyway, so 20%, 1,200 square feet. We'd also bring a bit more discussion and clarification more along with regard to the non-turf landscapes that this would apply to. And then I do think we have maybe separately, maybe tonight the board can't direct us to rescind Graywater because this is informational. So we would, what's that? Yeah, we hear that. So we would definitely bring that back as well, the rescinding the Graywater. So 1,200 square feet, 20% max, and some clarification in regards to the approach to the non-turf. So the artificial and the medium kind of meadow stuff. Just more understanding of why and the rationale for.
That sounds good. We'll check with other board members. I thought the input though that we had on the case of very small lots, where if we restrict it to 20%, they may end up with almost nothing. If there's some kind of additional consideration for very small lots.
Right. So we are getting to a point, but I do understand the question of the state. I mean, it's not a huge distinction of the 25 and 20. It's more, I think, of a sign that we want to be a bit better than the state, but we certainly could.
Fair enough. Other thoughts on Ben's suggestion?
North Marin is 600 square feet. And do we see Sonoma's numbers? Do we know what their ordinance is?
City of Sonoma?
No, I'm sorry, Sonoma Water, or each city's
Each
different.
city has their own independent.
Do you have any
ordinance.
Sonoma contractor information?
None of them have any turf limitations except for North Marin Water District. They all align with the state's 25%.
Interesting. I'm good with your proposal. Thanks.
Ranji, for clarification, the state's 25% does not have a square footage allotment tied to it.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, everyone's nodding here. Yeah.
Okay. And so by moving forward in that same vein, the 20% without a restriction, would that hinder the small lots or would that help the small lots?
Well, I think the argument was that basically it almost coincides with what the state would require, right? So, um,
Right, so the small lots are hit more by the percentage restriction certainly, and the larger lots by the square footage. So we're saying 1,200 square feet in this recommendation, really restricting large lots and the small, kind of a modest increase from the state's 20 in terms of stringentness from their 25 to 20.
I mean, the good news is there's so many great options out there. It's not like we're saying you can't have a lawn, right? We're just saying there's certain really, really thoughtful things you can do to have a gorgeous landscape that doesn't waste water. And I think this will be helpful.
And I would just add that what's the piece that's missing to clarify is that whichever's less, the lesser. So that would be whatever smaller amount. So if the 20% of the smaller lot landscape was less than 1,200, obviously that would control. So it is the more restrictive.
right. But just to make sure we're all on the same page on that point, for very small lots, let's say 4,000 square feet or below, we actually are not able to say, well, they have a 30%, because then we're out of compliance with state regulations.
That's right.
Yes. Similar to Jed, I think those are good proposals, Ben, for moving forward. Anyone else have thoughts on Ben's suggestions?
I'm good, thank you.
Carrie, what do you think? Yeah.
Okay, then I think we can move on. Thanks a lot again, Carrie, Paul. And we'll move to item 9B on our agenda, which is the grant program update.
Good evening, board members. Director of Watershed Resources, Sean Horn. The item before you is an informational item. We're going to provide a report out on our grant program. And to that effect, JP Haler, who oversees our grant program administration, is supporting the presentation this evening. And we put together an update for you that highlights where our program currently is. Last time we came to the board, we really tried to tie the various departments within the district to grant programs that were out there. So we were looking at kind of where do we find water infrastructure money, where do you find water supply money, and which programs did we see kind of opportunities for various projects. Tonight, we're going to really dive into the kind of the portfolio of our grant program and highlight what grants we're administering currently, and then talk through some recent grant activities that we've had, provide some kind of thoughts on where we're going in the next couple of months in terms of proposals that we're looking for, and then highlight some ways that we have kind of diversified our fundraising efforts at the district. And so with that, I'll hand it to JP to walk us through the presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. Nice to see you all today. So this slide just sort of represents the continuous kind of ongoing work of the grant program. And we talked about this before in April, but we're kind of constantly monitoring state and federal funding priorities, reaching out to funding agencies and building relationships with those folks. We do that a lot of times through the reporting that we're doing and outreaching about potential opportunities that we see and how they might fit with the district's priorities. Grant reporting is ongoing, of course, especially during periods like the end of the quarter. Financial administration that we do in collaboration with our finance team here, and then also grant tracking. So you saw this slide before. We just updated it to reflect the grants that we brought in since the last update in Q1. So we we increased that number by about 3 million with 2 new grants that came in. So that's just showing the difference since last time. You also saw this slide and we updated it to reflect the same increase. So last quarter, we showed 37 plus million, and this quarter it's 40. Of course, this is the last 4 years that we're talking about here. And we also created these helpful icons to kind of show maybe where that funding, a really easy visual to see where each funder is funding at the district. So you see that the mountain is sort of trails and watershed, water supply, fisheries, and BIFIP, which was pointed out to me. I misspelled BIFIP, so I'll change that next time. Also, we realized that it might be helpful to have a infrastructure icons. We'll be adding that in the future. So this is our active grant awards and applications. The bars that are all solid just represent a change in the awards that we have or applications that we've submitted. So that plus sign is things that have come in. The One Tam Forest Health Project grant from CAL FIRE, we talked about it before, but it's now been awarded at 3 million. The total award for the collaboration is that number in the parentheses. There's also a Marin County sort of direct award that came in. The rest of these are things that you've seen that we are administering, and also decisions pending from funders for applications that we've submitted.
And JP, let's highlight really quick, the USBR program is really exciting because that's a new one that we're going after for our BIFIP funding. We've never gone after the Water Smart funding for watershed efforts. So that's a new program that we're excited to see our opportunity with.
There's one more grant on here that we were recently awarded for the precipitation modeling for climate adaptation through USBR. The other grant that we applied to was also USBR for a planning and design grant for Nicosia. These are all grants.
Can you give a little color on the San Geronimo treatment plant thought process at FEMA? You're going to do that later. Yeah. I'm just curious how bad they think that is.
Well, yeah, if you don't mind, we'll get to that at the later slide and kind of debrief on what happened there.
Yep. And so this, not a lot to talk about. These are ongoing grants that we are managing and administering. Something to note is just many of these will be closing out this year. So in our final grant report at the end of the year, we'll have an update, and those numbers will look a little bit different because we'll be closing out many of these grants. So we'll move on to grant program updates, some of the grants that we already have and where we are with those projects. So a big one is the IRWIMP funding, the DWR grant for the Marin City San Rafael Pipeline Replacement Project. As many of you know, we were awarded that grant $6.5 million in 2023. And we are getting close to, we are advancing phase 1 of construction Marin City this fall to replace 2.9 miles of water mains. We're currently coordinating with Marin City Climate Resilience, which is our community engagement partner, who is sort of the second piece of this, implementing this grant. And we have a meeting with them this month to talk about just the fact that we're kind of pressed for time and advancing phase 1 of construction, and how we can support the community engagement effort in a way that's maybe decoupled from construction to move the project forward and work with that partner in a meaningful way. And then another note is just that we'll be planning coordination with Multicultural Center of Marin for the San Rafael part of this, implementing this grant project in Q2 of 2025. So here's to your question, Jed, around the FEMA BRIC grant for the San Geronimo treatment plant clarifiers. And we were not funded, and we did some analysis by speaking with the consultant. And it sounds like our application was eligible and compliant and a good application. We met all the requirements for Cal OES, but FEMA had a lot of applications and really big priorities this year. And so they ran out of money. I don't know if you wanted to say more about that.
No, I mean, I think FEMA is a program that historically is really competitive and difficult to get. Just that's an important thing to know. You can get large amounts of funding from them, but it is a very competitive process and a big application. So it's a big lift. There's another round of the BRIC, the Resilient Community Program, in October. So we'll be packaging up this application again and resubmitting. The other arm of FEMA is the Hazard Mitigation Program, but that does require some sort of disaster finding, and Marin County would have to be in that, and then we'd be using our Hazard Mitigation Program to support an application through that. So we did debrief with them, and we're going to follow up and have further conversations to understand if there's ways we can improve.
Well, I'm just more curious, like how bad of a risk is this? Do they take risk into account, or is it just?
There's a lot that goes into their ranking in terms of cost
Yeah, I'd love to
benefit
know that.
ratio and the
That-
risk.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Thanks. Cool.
So upcoming grant applications that are coming up quickly, we'll be working on pretty immediately is the CDFW Environmental Enhancement Fund grant that we'll be proposing for the Lagunitas Creek Phase 2. That application is due next month. The USBR, Sean mentioned the Water Smart Drought Resiliency grant. We are going to be applying for that in October, and we're still trying to determine what district priority we'll be applying for to match to that grant opportunity.
So the next one we wanted to highlight for you was the Mount Tam Watershed Fund, which we've never brought as part of the reporting process, but it's an important collaboration that we have with the Marin Community Foundation that was established in 1996 to provide visitors and other community members with an opportunity to support the district's stewardship of Mount Tam and the watershed lands. There's a current balance of about $661,000 in there. And we did hear that through our recreation management planning process, that there was an opportunity to better educate folks about the opportunity that they could have to support the district and its stewardship. And so we have established a QR code that we hope to utilize on our kiosks. So you'll remember one of our key strategic opportunities was updating some of the signage and education on the watershed. And so we're highlighting where we have cell reception and key locations where QR codes would be beneficial. We're also using QR codes to update our watershed maps and try to make those kind of offline capabilities for folks to get. And we're already seeing people utilize our maps in that way. So hoping to do those two improvements as we update our kiosks on the watershed in the next 6 to 8 months. And then the final one that we had for you tonight was in regards to our WRDA funding. This is a really important initiative that the district had. We've developed a partnership in collaboration with the Army Corps and thinking through how we can be eligible for this environmental infrastructure funding through WRDA. We're not successful in the Army Corps' work plan, but we did get our congressional and Senate representatives to put earmark requests in, and we're kind of evaluating and tracking how those are going to come through or not. We have had recent conversations with our congressional office, Huffman's office, as well as with the Army Corps to see how we can update our letter of intent and really break down our project request amounts to make sure that it can align with what their capabilities might be in the coming fiscal year. So that's kind of making us a little bit more competitive and putting a little pressure on the Corps to help fund that.
So in summary, we've successfully initiated grant-funded work on Lagunitas Creek that's happening now. We've secured USBR funding for advanced precipitation modeling.
Oh, hit your model again. There you go.
Thank you. We submitted an application for the USBR environmental resources for implementing BIFEP. Application was submitted for the USBR planning and design grant for the Nicasio Spillway modification project. And as Sean just mentioned, we're continuing to work with the Army Corps on opportunities for WRDA funding.
So that's the update we had for you. And if you've got any questions, we'd be happy to answer and those or think through how we can improve the grant program.
Thank you, JP. Thank you, Sean. Board discussion, Matt, we'll start with you this time.
I very much appreciate the time it took to put all this together. You know, managing grants is just a huge lift by itself, and then reporting out on them again to the board is just another thing to do. So thank you very much. It's also really good to see how much money we're putting into the watershed that's not coming from our own district. That's coming from external funds. It's as you know, it's helping accelerate us doing what we should be doing and need to be doing. So the effort to get that money is very much appreciated. looking out over the next, I guess, maybe year or 2 years, looking at applications or looking at grant opportunities maybe is a better way of other areas in the district that could be served. And I think one of them would be switch to alternative energy vehicles, potentially charging stations and things like that, modernization of the fleet, looking at some other opportunities to well round the grant pool to other areas outside the watershed, I think would be very helpful. But great job on all these fronts and much appreciated.
Thanks, Matt. Monty?
Matt said basically everything I was going to say, which is this is great. We really, bringing in money from outside sources so that it reduces the burden on our ratepayers is always appreciated. But also, can we expand our horizon with our resources, and look at other opportunities to bring in grant funding for other parts of our organization? I think that would be great. So thank you for all your great work.
Thanks, Monty. Larry, any thoughts?
Only one. Thank you. And thank you for putting this in this kind of tabular format. It makes it a lot easier to think about than just reeling off numbers. Do you have a feel on the likelihood of WRDA? I mean, I understand the dates and all that, but these are big jumps, not Senate approved, right? That's especially they're a little busy with election.
I think WRDA is an important one to think of. It's a long-term funding strategy. It's going to be multiple years of working on this to realize the full potential of that funding. There's definitely potential there this round, and I think we've got a lot of support from our congressional partners for this one, and we'll see how it plays out. To get new projects approved is really the tricky part. So we're a new project, and that's really where we've got to get our foot in the door. And once your foot in the door, you're going to have more success with the funding coming down the line. But I think we're positioned well, and we'll continue to work on it.
Do they publish the other grant application numbers? Like, do we know who's competing for grants?
Yeah.
And that would be helpful too, I think, to give a feel for, is someone like Metropolitan Water District looking for 42 million or something, not WRDA, but in something, we're looking for 400,000, they're looking for 40 million, in other words, take the whole program basically.
And are you talking specifically about WRDA still?
No, I
Okay.
just picked one.
Because WRDA's developed, the bill has all the entities that were approved for it and the total funding amount. But on an annual basis, we don't see what that is.
No,
kind of the full list goes to the Army Corps, and the Army Corps reviews.
Although Jared's office probably does.
Yeah, from
I
the
would
Transportation
think,
Committee. Yeah.
What he explained to me was basically that, you can earmark it, but then you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It could go that way or it could go this way.
Right.
Depending on what Congress gets massaged into doing.
Yeah, we've had multiple meetings with the Army Corps, and we hear a little bit of a different process each time. And so it's a difficult one to navigate entirely. And the WRDA process itself, the Army Corps had about a week to review a whole nation package of projects. So that you can imagine the complexity there.
Thank you, Larry. Jed?
Yeah, a couple of additional insights on that. I mean, some of these WRDA programs go on for decades, right? So we're not even off the ground yet. I mean, we have an idea out there. I think that the message was pretty clear to us. We need to get our plan together, and then the more clarity we have in our plan, the better they will have a sense of where it fits. I think we went in a little early last time with the electrification of Suluhuli. We didn't really know exactly how that was going to link into the rest of our strategic plan for water resiliency. And so therefore they couldn't quite see the future. And it also wasn't necessarily a direct fit for the Army Corps because that wasn't work that they do necessarily. So, but I do think that our strategy to have our plan in place, get Paul Cellier's work cranking, have a lot of clarity about phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. We know what we're doing. We know where we're going. And then you want to get that first little bit in the ground. And then once you get that first bit, that first $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, then you can start to get access to the rest. So good to keep it alive and going. I'm glad it's back on the table. But, I think, when we go in again, we want to be totally buttoned up. Just to reiterate, I hope you reach out to or been with your support to Grant and the Sonoma folks that do what you do. they're already working on Marin Sonoma grants. It's happening. And I just think you guys should be talking like every other week, right? That's just what I've seen in Washington is that they appreciate a regional approach. And I think they would love us to work together.
Thanks, Jed. Just small question on the Mount Tam Watershed Fund. How is that spent?
Yeah, that was I kind of glossed over that part. So the last time we used it was for a bridge on the Azalea Hill project. So after the board adopted that to kind of get that project started, we tapped that funding, but we tapped it to match a donation from the EMIG Trust, which helped fund that Bullfrog Bridge, which is like that entry point into the project and was critical for even allowing us to get the equipment over Bullfrog Creek to start construction on the other crossings. So when we've had an opportunity, we've brought it to the board for review and discussion to get approval to make a withdrawal from that fund for a project on the watershed.
Sean, do you see any advantage to having maybe a more concrete policy around the management of that? What those funds are applicable for, what balance we want to maintain, things like that.
I think it would be in the district's interest to kind of think of how to use those funds on a more routine basis. Yeah, because typically when you have foundation funds, you do want to be drawing on them on a kind of routine basis to kind of show the benefit of that to the community.
Yeah, because it's a good chunk of money
Yeah.
there, sitting there. We may be able to benefit more. Great. Terry, any public comments?
There are none.
Okay, then with that, this was also an informational item. Thank you, JP. Thank you, Sean. And then we'll move on to the review of our future board and committee meetings, Terry.
Okay. So we have, there will be no external meetings this month because I haven't received any notification. So all of our meetings this month will be internal meetings. That is basically next week. We have the Operations Committee meeting on Friday, August 16th at 9:30 a.m. Then the following week, we have back-to-back meetings. Tuesdays are regular board meeting. Wednesdays are Communications and Water Efficiency Committee meeting. And Thursday is our Finance and Administration Committee meeting. Some of the highlighted key items for all of those items, an update on the conveyance costs of water supply roadmap projects, the Watershed Recreation Management Plan Feasibility Study Pilot Program update, preliminary year-end results and connection fee study. So, we're excited about sharing that with you.
Great. Thanks, Terry. We'll be convening to close session next, but before we do that, I have to admit that I forgot an agenda item per usual, which is our board committee reports.
Oh.
And we had one committee meeting since our last board meeting that was on July 19th. We had our operations committee and special board meeting. Larry, can I just give a quick summary to wrap that one up? There were two agenda items on that meeting. We reviewed the Rock Ridge Pipeline Replacement Project, which is under our Fire Flow Improvement Program, and we received a staff update on renewable energy opportunities, which identified possibilities for solar installations at the San Geronimo treatment plant. So with that, I hope I don't get in too much trouble from somebody. Okay, and now we will reconvene to close session to discuss anticipated litigation. Terry, before we do so, do we have any public comments related to the closed session?
There are none.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're reconvening to open session, and I will report that the closed session was adjourned at about 9:15 p.m. with no actionable items to report. And with that, we are adjourning our open session of the Marin Water Board meeting of August 6, 2024.
Thank you.